The day the stars went silent. When silence fell across the galaxy. The galaxy had been quiet for exactly 300 years. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that comes with harmony, but the heavy silence that follows a storm. Every species that could speak had learned to whisper. Every civilization that could build had learned to kneel. The Kryn Collective ruled over 2,000 star systems with an iron fist wrapped in cold logic. They were ancient beyond measure, their empire spanning half the known galaxy. Their ships moved through space like shadows, their weapons could shatter moons, and their patience was infinite. They had crushed every rebellion before it could take its first breath. On a small station orbiting a dying star, an old Valkyrie merchant named Thren sat in his shop surrounded by artifacts from dead civilizations. The Valkyrie had been conquered 8 centuries ago. Thren's people had forgotten what it meant to stand tall. He ran his fingers over a broken sword from his homeworld, remembering stories his grandmother had told him about warriors who once fought for freedom. Those days were gone now, buried under generations of submission. The communications array in his shop suddenly crackled to life. Thren jumped, nearly dropping the sword. No one used those old frequencies anymore. The Kryn monitored everything. Speaking on open channels was asking for trouble. But the signal was strong and getting stronger. Then he heard it. A voice speaking in a language he had never heard before, full of sharp sounds and strange rhythms. The words meant nothing to him, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a challenge. Someone, somewhere, was broadcasting a declaration of war against the Kryn Collective. Thren's hands shook as he traced the signal's origin. It came from a region of space the Kryn had only recently discovered. A small yellow star with several planets orbiting it. The third planet was marked in the Kryn database with a simple designation, evaluation pending. The humans, whoever they were, had just announced their existence to the galaxy in the worst possible way. The arrival of the Iron Fleet. Commander Vex of the Kryn Collective stood on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment, the flagship of the Iron Fleet. She was tall and thin, her silver skin reflecting the cold light of the view screens. Her species had evolved past the need for emotions millions of years ago. They made decisions based purely on mathematics and efficiency. The humans had been evaluated, measured, and found lacking. Their technology was primitive. Their military was scattered across their small solar system. They had no shields, no energy weapons, no faster-than-light travel. Conquering them would take less than a week. The Iron Fleet consisted of 500 warships, each one capable of destroying a city with a single shot. They moved toward Earth's solar system in perfect formation, their hulls black as the void between stars. Vex reviewed the data one final time. The humans had been given the standard offer: surrender and join the collective as workers, or resist and be eliminated. Every species received this choice. Every species chose surrender once they saw the fleet. Except the humans had sent back a response that confused the Kryn analysis programs. The message was short: come and take it. Vex didn't understand the phrase. Her computers couldn't find any logical meaning in it. It seemed to be an invitation to battle, but that made no sense. The humans had to know they would lose. Perhaps it was a translation error. She would understand soon enough. A world unprepared. On Earth, in the city of New Geneva, Director Sarah Chin stood before the Emergency Council with her shoulders squared and her jaw tight. She was 48 years old, a former engineer who had spent 20 years building Earth's modest space defense network. She had never expected to actually use it. The room was filled with representatives from every nation on Earth. They argued in a dozen languages, their voices rising in panic. The Kryn fleet would arrive in 72 hours. Earth's entire military consisted of 30 small patrol ships and a handful of orbital defense platforms. They had been built to handle asteroids and space debris, not an invasion. A politician from the European coalition stood up, his face red with frustration. "We should have negotiated," he shouted. "We should have accepted their terms. At least some of us would survive." Sarah turned to face him, her dark eyes hard as stone. Survive as what? She asked quietly. As slaves? As factory workers for an empire that doesn't even remember our names? The politician sat down but continued to mutter. Others joined his argument. Surely slavery was better than extinction. Surely some chance of survival was better than none. An old soldier named Marcus Webb rose from his seat in the back of the room. He was 70 years old, a veteran of the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth 50 years ago. His voice was rough but steady. I've been in battles I couldn't win, he said. I've watched good people die for causes that seemed hopeless. But I learned something in those wars. The only thing worse than dying is living without dignity. He looked around the room at the frightened faces. These aliens expect us to beg. They expect us to give up everything just to breathe a little longer. I say we show them what humans do when someone tries to take our freedom. The room fell silent. Sarah Chen felt something shift in the air. Fear was still there, thick and heavy, but something else was growing beneath it. Anger. Stubborn, defiant anger. The vote was called. It was not unanimous, but the majority chose to fight. Earth would meet the Kryn fleet with everything they had. It wouldn't be enough, but it would be theirs. Preparing for the impossible. The next 72 hours transformed Earth. Every factory retooled to produce weapons. Every scientist turned their attention to military applications. Retired soldiers reported to recruitment centers. Civilians volunteered in numbers that overwhelmed the military infrastructure. In orbit, engineers worked around the clock to upgrade the defense platforms. They welded armor plating onto ships designed for peaceful patrol. They mounted mining lasers onto cargo vessels. They filled transport shuttles with explosives and programmed them as kamikaze drones. In the asteroid belt, a mining crew led by a woman named Catherine Rodriguez received the news on their long-range scanners. Catherine was 35, a third-generation miner who had spent her entire life in space. Her crew of 20 operated a small mining vessel called the Rusty Hammer. It was old and slow, held together with patches and prayers. When they heard about the invasion, they gathered in the mess hall to discuss their options. They were too far from Earth to run home. They could hide among the asteroids and hope the Kryn never found them, or they could fight. The vote was quick. Catherine modified their mining charges to work as space mines. They scattered them along the route the Kryn fleet would likely take. It wasn't much, but it was something. If we're going to die, Catherine told her crew, let's make sure we take some of them with us. Her crew agreed. They were miners, not soldiers, but they knew how to work hard and how to fight for what was theirs. On Mars, in the underground colonies beneath the red sand, Governor James Torres addressed his people through the colony's communication network. Mars had always been independent-minded, proud of what they had built in the harsh Martian environment. Torres was a big man with a weathered face and hands scarred from years of construction work. We're 3 light minutes from Earth, he said. By the time we know how the battle goes, it will already be over. But we can make sure that if Earth falls, the Kryn pay for every meter of ground. He ordered the colony's defenders to fortify every tunnel, every dome, every inch of Mars. If the Kryn wanted Mars, they would have to dig for it. The last night. As the final hours ticked away, people across Earth said goodbye in 1,000 different ways. Families gathered for dinners that might be their last. Lovers held each other in the darkness. Children were told stories about heroes who faced impossible odds. In cities around the world, people climbed to rooftops to look at the stars, wondering which point of light would bring death. Sarah Chen sat alone in her office, reviewing tactical data she had already memorized. She knew the mathematics. Earth's 30 ships against 500 Kryn warships. The defense platforms would last minutes. The ships would last maybe an hour. Then it would be over. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from her daughter, safely evacuated to a bunker in the Himalayas. The message was simple: make them remember us, Mom. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears on her cheeks for the first time in years. She wiped them away and stood up. She put on her uniform jacket and checked her sidearm. If this was humanity's last stand, she would face it standing tall. Across the solar system, millions of humans made the same choice. They were terrified, but they were ready. The Kryn were coming, and humanity would show them what it meant to fight for home. First blood. When giants came to call. The Kryn Iron Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system exactly on schedule. 500 massive warships materialized in the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit, their black hulls drinking in the light from the distant sun. On the bridge of the Eternal Judgment, Commander Vex reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The human defenses were laughable. 30 small ships clustered around their homeworld like children hiding behind their mothers' skirts. The orbital platforms were primitive, barely worth counting as weapons. Vex sent the final surrender demand. It was standard procedure, though she expected no response. The humans had 48 hours to comply before the fleet would advance. She settled into her command chair to wait. The Kryn were patient. They had time. What Vex didn't know was that the humans had spent those 72 hours doing more than just preparing defenses. They had been planning something desperate and brilliant and completely insane. The asteroid ambush. The Kryn fleet began its advance toward Earth, moving in perfect formation through the asteroid belt. Their sensors detected the floating rocks but registered no threats. Asteroids were common in every solar system. The ships glided forward, their shields at minimum power to conserve energy for the coming battle. Then Catherine Rodriguez, sitting in the control room of the Rusty Hammer 3 million kilometers away, pressed a button on her modified mining computer. The asteroids exploded. 50 chunks of rock that the Kryn had passed without concern detonated simultaneously. But these weren't ordinary explosions. The miners had packed them with refined uranium and wrapped them in reflective shielding. They were giant dirty bombs designed to scatter radioactive material in every direction. The expanding clouds of debris hit the Kryn ships at thousands of kilometers per second. The Kryn shields, set to minimum power, weren't designed to stop that kind of material. Radioactive particles peppered the hulls of 17 ships. The radiation interfered with their sensor arrays and communication systems. It wasn't enough to destroy the vessels, but it was enough to blind them and cut them off from the fleet. On the Eternal Judgment, alarms blared for the first time in the campaign. Vex stood up from her chair, her silver face showing the closest thing to surprise that a Kryn could express. The humans had struck first. The humans, with their primitive technology and desperate courage, had drawn first blood. The defense of Earth. The Kryn fleet accelerated toward Earth, angry now in their cold, logical way. They would make the humans pay for that ambush. They would show them the price of defiance. As they approached Earth's orbit, the 30 human ships moved to intercept. They were small and fragile compared to the Kryn vessels, but they moved with purpose and precision. Sarah Chen commanded the defense from the orbital station Vigilance. Her voice was calm as she gave orders to the fleet. "Remember the plan," she said. "We're not trying to win. We're trying to hurt them." The human ships didn't charge forward in a suicidal rush. Instead, they scattered, moving in unpredictable patterns that confused the Kryn targeting computers. The Kryn were used to enemies who fought in formation, who followed military doctrine, who behaved logically. The humans did none of these things. They fired missiles from impossible angles. They used the orbital platforms as cover. They detonated nuclear weapons in their own path to create debris fields that disrupted Kryn sensors. The first Kryn ship to die was the Endless Silence, a destroyer that pursued a human frigate called the Jakarta. The Jakarta led the destroyer into a trap where 3 other human ships were waiting. They fired everything they had at once, overwhelming the Kryn shields with sheer volume of fire. The Endless Silence broke apart, its reactor detonating in a flash of blue-white light. On the Eternal Judgment, Vex watched the tactical display with growing concern. One destroyer was nothing, but the way it died worried her. The humans were fighting smart, using tactics the Kryn databases had no record of. The sacrifice of the defenders. The battle raged for 6 hours. One by one, the human ships were destroyed. They fought hard and died harder, but they were simply outmatched. The orbital platforms fired until their weapons melted and then detonated their power cores to damage nearby Kryn ships. The crews of the human vessels stayed at their posts even as their ships burned around them. When the frigate Manila lost its engines and weapons, its captain aimed the crippled vessel at a Kryn cruiser and activated the self-destruct. The explosion took both ships into the dark. Sarachan watched from vigilance as her fleet was systematically destroyed. She had known this would happen, but knowing didn't make it easier. Each ship that died took people with it. People with families and dreams and futures that would never come. She forced herself to watch every death, to remember every sacrifice. When only 5 human ships remained, she gave the order she had been dreading. All remaining vessels, retreat to the surface. Get as many crew members to the evacuation shuttles as possible. We've done what we could. The last ships broke away from the battle and dove toward Earth's atmosphere. The Kryn fleet pursued, but Sarah had one more trick ready. The humans had seeded Earth's orbital space with thousands of reflective balloons filled with metal shavings. When the Kryn ships entered the field, their sensors lit up with millions of false targets. It bought the retreating human vessels precious minutes to reach the surface. Sarah sat in her command chair on vigilance and waited. The station was damaged, its weapons exhausted, its shields failing. She could have evacuated, but she chose to stay. Someone had to record what happened here. Someone had to make sure this battle was remembered. The cost of victory. When the Kryn finally destroyed vigilance, Sarachan transmitted one final message to every receiver on Earth and Mars and in the asteroid belt. Today, we proved that humanity will fight for its freedom. We lost, but we hurt them. We showed them that humans don't surrender. We showed them that some things are worth dying for. Her transmission ended as the station broke apart around her. The Kryn fleet regrouped in orbit around Earth, counting their losses. They had destroyed all human orbital defenses and most of the human fleet. By any measure, they had won. But the victory had cost them 19 ships destroyed and 43 damaged. In 300 years of conquest, the Kryn had never lost so many vessels to a single species. The humans had been outgunned, outmanned, and technologically inferior, yet they had made the Kryn bleed. On the surface of Earth, the survivors watched the burning wreckage fall from the sky like shooting stars. They had lost the first battle, but they had proven something important. They had proven that the Kryn could be hurt. Commander Vex stood on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment and reviewed the battle reports with confusion. The humans had fought with no hope of winning. They had sacrificed themselves for small tactical gains. It made no logical sense. Her tactical officer approached with new data. "Commander," the officer said, "we're detecting activity on the planet's surface. The humans are mobilizing ground forces." Vex looked at the blue and green planet below. "They're going to fight on the ground as well," she said. "Of course they are." For the first time in her long career, Commander Vex felt something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, because the Kryn didn't feel fear. It wasn't respect, because the Kryn didn't respect inferior species. But it was something. The humans were different from every other species she had conquered. They didn't fight like they wanted to win. They fought like they wanted to be remembered. And they were succeeding.